All right, Texas officials just held a pretty intense press conference after 27 people were confirmed dead thus far in the catastrophic flooding. And in this press conference, they directly blamed the recent cuts to the National Weather Service. After media reports and experts warned for months that drastic and sudden cuts at the National Weather Service by Trump could impair their forecasting ability and endanger lives during the storm season, Texas officials blame an inaccurate forecast by NWS for the deadly results of the flood, in which 24 young girls at a camping trip have now been declared dead.
The original forecast that we received on Wednesday from the National Weather Service predicted 3 to 6 inches of rain in the Concho Valley and 4 to 8 inches of rain in the Hill Country. You can go back and look at your own forecast, and the amount of rain that fell in this specific location was never in any of those forecasts.
There has been widespread and urgent criticism from scientists, former officials, lawmakers, and advocacy groups regarding the Trump admin's proposed and enacted cuts to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the NWS, yet the Trump admin continued to make these cuts. Let's call this what it is: another deliberate assault on the public good, on the safety of the public, orchestrated by Republicans in a top-down manner to help the richest of the rich. That is what it is.
All right, do you guys see this right here? So this post says, after Trump was warned for months that cuts to the National Weather Service would result in Americans dying needlessly, the incompetent psychopath did it anyway. 27 people are dead in Texas, with dozens still missing. And for what? For tax cuts for billionaires? Remember that. For tax cuts for billionaires. Now, I wanted to double check and verify that these cuts were actually made prior to, and it seems as though they were. Granted, I don't know if this necessarily had any impact on these meteorologists, these weather people, to accurately predict what was going to happen, let alone the fact that perhaps maybe what happened wasn't even predictable, as it may or may not have been altered by man. Regardless, the X post by Bill Madden attributes the catastrophic flooding in Texas, which resulted in 27 deaths and dozens missing, to budget cuts made by former President Donald Trump to the National Weather Service, NWS, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, and OAA, despite warnings from experts about the potential for impaired forecasting and needless deaths. And unfortunately, in situations like these, the first and only thing to do is to figure out who to point blame at. And you have two choices: Trump or Biden. And here they point to Trump. In another instance, I think Kristi Noem pointed to Biden. I think I saw that earlier.
I live in Kerrville. Why was the National Weather Service not pinging our phones before 7 o'clock the day of 4th of July? We need the federal people to answer that maybe for us. I got updates at 7 o'clock. The first one I heard. And I've heard updates throughout the week, but not before 7 o'clock in the morning. Wasn't that a fundamental failure of the federal government's responsibility to keep us safe?
Well, you know, my background is, before I was in the secretary position here under the Trump administration, I was governor of South Dakota and served in Congress for 8 years before I was governor. And so I will tell you that for decades, for years, everybody knows that the weather is extremely difficult to predict, but also that the National Weather Service over the years at times has done well, and at times we have all wanted more time and more warning and more alerts and more notification. That is something, and one of the reasons that when President Trump took office, that he said he wanted to fix, and is currently upgrading the technology. And the National Weather Service has indicated that with that and NOAA, that we needed to renew this ancient system that has been left in place with the federal government for many, many years, and that is the reforms that are ongoing there. The timeline that I have, I don't oversee the National Weather Service. That's not under my department, but the timeline that I did receive from them was that the notifications started to look at its expansion for its limited flood impact area that started on July 3rd at 1:18 p.m. The flood watch was issued. Although it was moderate, it wasn't to the extremes that it was, that when the system came over the area that it stalled It was much more water, much like I think we experienced during Harvey. The same type of system that was unpredictable in the way that it reacted and the way that it stopped right here and dumped unprecedented amounts of rain that caused a flooding event like this. They continue to elevate and up their notifications. When your notification hit your phone, sir, I'm sorry, I can't speak to when that is, but I do carry your concerns back to the federal government and to President Trump, and we will do all we can to fix those kinds of things that may have felt like a failure to you and to your community members. But we know that everybody wants more warning time, and that's why we're working to upgrade the technologies that have been neglected by far too long to make sure that families have as much advanced notice as possible. But
these cuts, part of Trump's Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE initiative, have led to a reduction of over 500 staffers at the NWS since the beginning of the year, leaving some offices unstaffed overnight and cutting key programs and satellites critical for tracking extreme weather, which I would imagine there were probably extreme weather events prior to this second Trump term before staffers were cut. But that doesn't make the news, folks. The Post's claim is challenged by some reports indicating that the NWS issued timely warnings, including a flood watch for Kerr County more than 12 hours before the flood and a flash flood warning 3 hours prior, suggesting that the service performed its duties despite the resource constraints. But it is definitely a CYA scenario and situation here. And the only one saying that it is Trump's fault are folks like Adam Mockler here, who insert Trump's name when Texas officials never once mentioned Trump's name, as far as I can tell. But how does this work? How does this work out? Because, like I said, I want you to pay very close attention to, and for what? For tax cuts for billionaires. These cuts, might I remind you, part of Trump's Department of Government Efficiency DOGE initiative. And that's where things really start to fall off the rails, folks, at least for me. It's official. Elon Musk has filed a statement of organization with the Federal Election Commission to form the America Party. SpaceX's Hawthorne facility or factory is listed as the headquarters, and it says play to win or don't play at all, game on. Okay. So we've got a new party here. Breaking. Elon Musk just launched the America Party, but Brian Allen says, let's call it what it is. A direct-to-consumer grift engineered to bleed the MAGA base dry. And he says LFG. So I would assume we can predict which side he's on. But I don't know. Not 100% sure. Don't know who that guy is. Now I'm curious. Brian Allen. Oh, I think I remember this guy. This guy was putting out some fake reports, I think, during the election, during the campaign. If that's who I think it is, and you guys remember, let me know. Regardless, Claude Taylor asks, yes or no, did 24 young girls die in Texas flooding in part because Trump gutted NOAA and the National Weather Service? What do you guys think? And as I mentioned earlier, the predictability of this flash flood, was it really? Or was there some form of interference by man here that would have made it impossible to truly predict?
My name is Augustus DeRico. I'm the CEO and founder of Rainmaker. We're a cloud seeding company that is enhancing precipitation via advanced radar and also drones for the sake of supplementing water supplies for farms, cities, reservoirs, and wildlife throughout the United States. Our ultimate vision is to end water scarcity, and we've begun that mission already. I'm testifying to not oppose the spirit of this bill, which I think is well-founded, but the current configuration of the bill that I think would impede this mission for ending water scarcity and also for bringing the best-in-class technology to Florida and the rest of the United States. And so the first point that I'd like to make is the difference between solar radiation management and cloud seeding. And so Senator Garcia did bring this up briefly. Solar radiation management is a very new technology. It's not something that's been tested at length. NOAA has done some very initial experiments on its efficacy. It is attempting to reduce the amount of solar radiation that makes it down to the planet by injecting reflective aerosols into the upper atmosphere. Once you inject these aerosols, they stay in the stratosphere for years. They have effects on the entire climate. The data from these experiments, because the experiments have been so few, is limited. And so the implications of them are not something that are well tested yet. Cloud seeding is altogether different. The only similarity is that it has to do with the atmosphere. It has to do with the low atmosphere. It's a mechanism, or it's a tool that either freezes the water in existing clouds or condenses the droplets in existing clouds into bigger snowflakes or bigger droplets such that they fall onto your target watershed or farm. It's a technology that has existed for 80 years in the United States. It was patented by GE in 1946. But it hasn't been viable for a long time because we didn't have the appropriate radar to measure exactly what its effect is. I can tell you definitively that there is not cloud seeding going on in the state of Florida because you would be able to see its effect on radar. So the National Center for Atmospheric Research produced some great results from what's called the SNOWY campaign, where they were able to verify cloud seeding's effect, and they saw tens of millions of gallons of precipitation occur from each of their interventions. And that was very, very easily distinguishable on radar. It also is worth saying that it's local in its scope, and it is very short temporally. So if ever there is cloud seeding going on and you don't like the consequences of it, there are unintended consequences, and it's quite well characterized, so the unintended consequences are minimal. You can stop whenever you like. So that point of differentiation between solar radiation management, which is something that I think the public should scrutinize more heavily, and cloud seeding, is important to make from the top. Then the second point I'd like to make is that, well, it has to do with the safety of cloud seeding, right? Because this has to do with environmental health, particularly pollution. Cloud seeding is conventionally done with a chemical called silver iodide. Its LD50, so its lethal dose, is 10 times higher than aspirin. And we're using about 50 grams per each operation. That's as much as can fit in the palm of your hand, right? That's less flour than is in a slice of bread. So the amount that accumulates into watersheds is in the parts per trillion after decades of operation, and we have data to prove that from programs that exist throughout the United States. This leads me into another point, which is the precedent that other states have set in cloud seeding permitting and licensing. So I think that, per what I said at the top of my commentary, the spirit of this bill to protect Floridians, to protect Americans from environmental pollution, that is great. And I think that permitting and licensing absolutely should exist. It does exist in states like Texas and Utah and Idaho. So this isn't a blue state or red state issue. California has a process as well. New Mexico has a process. And we don't want anybody wantonly modifying the weather. So implementing a permitting regime so that it's only done responsibly and safely with best-in-class meteorological practices, that makes sense. And we advocate for that. Not only do we advocate for that, we, Rainmaker Technology Corporation, has engineers in all of those states that I mentioned that are actively modifying the weather, that are actively enhancing precipitation for farmers and reservoirs and cities that are undergoing drought. And that brings me into like my third and closing point. Like, what is this bill about? What are we voting on here? Yes, this has to do with Florida, first and foremost. I don't think that burdening the state with more regulation, with more permitting on investigation is something that it would necessarily be excited about, but if it was for the sake of protecting Floridians, that makes sense. I don't think that we want to prevent Florida's access to best-in-class technology for their agriculture and their water and their wildlife. But more than that, it has to do with the United States, both domestically and abroad. No ifs, ands, or buts. Mar-a-Lago exists here. Florida is a very consequential state within the United States. And if weather modification is banned here, that sets a precedent to deprive farmers in even more arid regions of the country from getting access to water from cloud seeding. And so if only for the sake of other Americans, for other farming interests, for other cities like Salt Lake, which is currently radically under budget for their water supply, and people are getting respiratory issues from the dust kicked up from the evaporation, cloud seeding could mitigate that. If this precedent is set here, it could affect other Americans. And not only could it affect us immediately within the United States, but long-term it could affect us geopolitically, because China has a $300 million annual budget for weather modification research and operations. And if we are to ban this here, if that precedent is set throughout the rest of the United States and perhaps federally, then we will lose control over the weather to China. And that's not something that I, as a patriot, or I think anybody else in Florida would advocate for. So in closing, I think that permitting and licensing for cloud seeding, which is a technology that other states throughout the union have adopted and created, I advocate for wholeheartedly, but SRM is something altogether different.
Thank you, Mr. DeRico. I think Senator Pizzo has a question.
Meanwhile, some of these reports are coming from NBC, and it says, don't worry, they're not biased at all. I'm not sure if anybody else has noticed this, but weathermen have never been able to predict the weather, and they continuously wrong always, says that post there. Since when have they accurately forecast the weather? Good question. And then this one here says, reminder, a brave South Florida weatherman interrupted his weather forecast last month to expose Trump's dangerous budget cuts, saying they've crippled his ability to accurately predict weather conditions. This is what happens when you vote for morons. Kim says NOAA cuts haven't happened yet. They're scheduled for fiscal year 2026, which starts October 1, 2025. And AKA asks, do you believe the government can alter the weather? But either way, here's where I'm a little bit confused, or perhaps maybe in a similar scenario as these weather meteorologists and predictions, future predictions, because I'm not quite sure what to expect. And so you've got the left hating on Trump, blaming this on Trump, also pointing to this all happened for tax cuts for billionaires. Meanwhile, they're praising the idea that Elon Musk is going to create, or actually has created, this America Party, for which he himself, might I remind you, is a billionaire multiple times over. Not only is he a billionaire, but so is Mark Cuban. And it says, update, Mark Cuban indicates he wants to become part of Elon Musk's new America Party. So it's truly, so far, a party of billionaires. What an absolute clown you turned out to be, is what Chris Barron says to Elon Musk. And Elon Musk says, by a factor of 2 to 1, you want a new political party and you shall have it. And when it comes to bankrupting our country with waste and graft, we live in a one-party system, not a democracy. And Chris Barron says, Trump saved America, and you're busy pissing away your goodwill on an insane vanity project that will only help to elect Democrats. I don't think Elon really cares. And I saw a clip somewhere where somebody mentioned that. Maybe it was Doug in Exile. I think it was Doug in Exile. He said that Elon didn't really care about Tesla.
Elon Musk just made the biggest political mistake. What a dummy. You guys know I'm squealing like a little girl about how he fully supports Trump. Guess he couldn't handle the heat he got for his Doge work and now has to try to win back that spot from the libs. No, I don't think so. Tesla sales are way down. I don't think he cares. I don't think it's true. This goes, he's going to split the vote Ross Perot style.
I don't think he does either. I also don't think Tesla's going to make it to $500 a share ever in my lifetime. Not after this. And it's not because of Tesla. It's because of Elon, unfortunately. So if Elon were to remove himself from Tesla and Tesla were to maintain and continue on and be progressive and innovative, then perhaps maybe. Unless robotaxis start killing people on the streets, but we'll just have to cross that bridge when we get to it. Elon's politics were good to get Trump elected. Now they're terrible for Elon, his personal brand, and his businesses, I think. And his choices and decisions here. I thought that this was a joke. I thought that this was a game. I thought that him and Trump were like playing the media again, but maybe I was wrong. But he's pissing away his goodwill on an insane vanity project that will only help to elect Democrats. And maybe this is why Democrats will choose to gloss over the glaring, obvious problem here of a party being created by billionaires for tax cuts for billionaires. And Bill Mitchell says, instead of wasting time with a third party, why doesn't Elon focus on recruiting and supporting better GOP candidates? But the left is going to absolutely leverage this and push for this and capitalize on this opportunity, because they all should, in theory, drag Elon Musk for the Doge cuts and Doge initiative that led to a reduction of over 500 staffers at the NWS post Texas flash flooding disaster catastrophe. But instead, they point the finger, the blame, at President Trump. And if you like the video, let me know and subscribe. If you're on Medicare, soon will be enrolling, or know someone who is, make the call to Chapter now for free. Get expert care from trained specialists who will sift through all your options and hunt for every possible saving. Stop overpaying, save more, and protect your wallet against inflation and rising costs. With tariffs and executive orders kicking off Monday, President Trump may put global markets on notice, which could shake up your finances. Think bank accounts, income, taxes, Social Security, and more. Be ready. Get prepared. Call Chapter today. The number's on your screen, 270-467-2426. Dial now and start saving big, fast. Jan just shared she switched to Chapter and saved $1,200 a year. That's huge. And your savings could be even greater. Pick up the phone, call 270-467-2426, and see how quick, simple, and free it is to let Chapter help you. Don't wait. Call now.